Hello, I'm Roger Bisbee from the Skill Builder channel, and today I'm going to be waterproofing this wall in a basement. Now, I've already put a straightening coat of render onto the brickwork, but we've got a bit of damp, and you can actually, funnily enough, through the render, even though I used SPR in the render, you can see the pattern of damp emerging beneath these windows. So what we've done outside, what Sam Wall did, is to put an echo drain in all the way along, and that has helped the situation greatly, but we just want to make sure there's nothing coming in here. Now, we've got a membrane that comes under the floor and up the side of the insulation and the flow screed, and that is finishing just there. So what I'm now going to do is apply 2 coats of Safeguard TS Plus, which is a polymer reinforced cementitious waterproofing base. Now, that sounds like a mouthful, but the difference is that you can use this below ground. You may have used some kind of slurry coating above ground, but in this wall, because it's below ground, we need that polymer. The polymer does a number of things. It binds it together, it helps the waterproofing, and it stops any micro cracking. Now, I know there will be people listening to this who say, yeah, well, all you're doing there is trapping the moisture in. Now, to a certain extent, that's true, because the moisture just carries on through under the ground. But what we're actually doing here is, by putting this coating on, it's microporous. It will still allow the wall to breathe, if you like that term, but it will keep back the water. So it's a very clever idea. Now, if you've got salts in the wall, which happily we didn't have in this situation, this TS Plus will also help keep the salts back. So once we've done the 2 coats, we're going to leave that to dry overnight, and then I'm going to apply Highline Plaster, which is a Renovation plaster. Again, it's got this breathability. I hate using that word all the time, but it's, you know, people understand it. It means that it allows the moisture in vapor form to escape through and not trap it. First thing I've got to do is mix it up. Now, the great thing about TS Plus is it's a bag and bottle mix, so you don't have to measure out water. You just pour the polymer in and then the powder and whisk it up. So that's looking good now, and in a more benevolent regime, I might go and have a cup of tea now, leave this for 5 minutes, then come back and just give it another whisk. The idea of that is that it lets the polymer absorb the powder, and then you just give it a tiny little bit more whisk. No more liquid, don't put any more liquid in, just liven it up again, then that'll increase the open time of it, make it easier to work with. I'm not going to have a cup of tea because I've got another very important job to do. Now, it's quite a warm room I'm working in here, unfortunately, because I've had the underfloor heating on for a week or 2, but hopefully with this, I won't be chasing it too much. I've turned the heating off now, giving me a fighting chance, but we see how it goes. The idea is I actually want to put 2 coats on in succession. So 1 coat, then a couple of hours, let it firm up, and then follow up with the 2nd coat. And that will make sure that there's no little gaps that we've left anywhere. But you can use this above ground, by the way. It's not, when I said you can use it below ground and you might use the water-based mix above ground, there's no harm in using the polymer one above ground. It's a great product, and it does a better job. Now, normally I'd lay a board down on the floor to catch the drop-ins, but actually what I want to do in this case, I want to run this over the screed. We might put a fillet in some cases, but that would normally be before you've put the concrete in. So there's various ways of doing this. What I would say is if you need any guidance on this, get in touch with Safeguard, because they can give you a kind of a plan, if you like, on what you should do. But very often you'll see a fillet, a cement-based fillet going down from here. But in this case, as I say, when I bring the polymer over the top, any moisture is going to go down behind that membrane, so we'll be fine. I don't envisage any problems, but then again, I never do. Now, it's dragging a bit, this. It's again, because it's warm here, it's harder to work than something like conventional plaster. But I think it's going to adhere to the wall beautifully. So it's, as I said, I keep mentioning how warm it is in this room, and I just hope I haven't mixed up more than I can put on, because I don't know what the open time's going to be like on this. So we'll see what happens, but it may have been that I needed to mix up half a bucket at a time, but it's certainly making me sweat. Now I've put the first coat of TS Plus on the wall, we wait for this to dry. It says 2 to 4 hours, but you can see it's blue when it goes on, and once that blue goes, once it goes to brown, then it'll be ready to go. But you can almost tell by touch, but again, a little bit of lunch and I'll come back and do the second coat. It's just dry enough to put the second coat of this TS Plus tanking slurry onto the wall. Before I do, I just want to talk about this, because what I did here is that it was rough brickwork and I rendered it to get a flat surface in order to put the tanking slurry on. Now, if you just tried to put this tanking slurry on rough bricks, or even some people try on painted surfaces, what you're doing there is you're not getting a flat surface to put the tanking slurry against. It's going in and out, it's got all kinds of little nooks and crannies. Now, when the water's pushing against it from the outside, that is likely, not definitely, but likely to fail. Whereas if you give it a proper flat surface to go onto, then it will adhere better. So this is actually tested for 50 meters of head, which is a huge amount, but we've got to remember this is done in a laboratory and it's done with flat concrete, really solid concrete. When you're doing it in an actual Victorian sand and lime construction basement, you're talking about very different things. So that's why we level it out with that coat of render, that SBR, just to give us a nice flat surface and give it the maximum chance of working. And the polymers mean that the whole thing is knitted together. It'll prevent the crazing, it'll prevent the cracking. So we're not talking about point pressure, basically. We're talking about an even pressure across the wall. And that's very, very important. That if you're going to give it the maximum chance of success, use the polymer-based one, even the wall out first, and apply the 2 coats, and then you should be fine. Now, while I'm here, I just want to talk about another product in the Safeguard range, which is this Plaster Mesh tanking membrane, and this is a low profile one. You may have seen this before with the bigger studs, but the idea is that you've formed a cavity behind it for the water to drain down behind the membrane, and what you then do is you have a channel along the floor which collects the moisture and takes it away to a pump. So if you've got major problems with water penetration in a basement, you may be better looking at a membrane as opposed to a tanking slurry. But the best thing to do is talk to Safeguard, tell them what you've got, and they will recommend the right product for your job. But this is a great product, it's very easy to fix. You basically put it up against a wall, you drill the holes, plug the thing, and then when you come to do the joins, you use this self-adhesive tape which sticks incredibly well, and it has a fleecy back there so that you can actually plaster over. Now, if you didn't want to plaster over, if you didn't want to put yourself a hardwall coat and then a finished coat of plaster on there, you can actually stop and dab on this membrane rather than a wet coat plaster. So some people prefer that because it's a lot cleaner and it's a lot quicker just to go around and dot and dab. Personally, I'm not a big fan of plasterboard in basements. I think that paper face is not great. So I would rather do it with a high-line plaster because I like to keep gypsum out of the equation wherever I can. I did mix the whole lot up. Yeah. But I'm going to probably have to, because we had so much left on. So now I've left that TS Plus to dry overnight, it's time to put the high lime plaster on. And the great thing about this lime plaster is that it's kind of breathable, it absorbs a little bit of condensation, moisture from the air, it's warm to the touch. So it's the ideal product for basements which especially suffering from condensation, because it just absorbs a little bit of moisture and then releases it, almost like a buffer. And it is breathable, but it's also resistant to salt. So if you've got some gypsum plaster and you can see the salt's coming through, hack that off, put this on, much better. So you can see the light coming through here. That's why I put that light on the wall down there. So you can see where the hollow spot is. So I just need to put a bit more in there. Then when I've got a few of these bands or screens down the wall, if you like, then all I'll be able to do is go up and straighten the wall out all the way along so that it's the same as the top. Put a bit more on there. A bit more on there.
So what coat are we up to now?
This will be the
second lot of lime.
Second coat, because I've scratched it there to get the key. Now this is something that I learned from Kirk Johnstone, who has an excellent YouTube channel on plastering. He gives you loads and loads of tips, and one thing that he told me is when you're putting this on, this is a little bit like monocouche, so let's pretend it's monocouche or whatever. The idea is put it on thicker than you need, put more on than you need, and then rule it off and just take off the high spots. And what I used to do is I didn't put it on thick enough, and then as I was ruling it off, it revealed loads and loads of low spots, and I had to go back over it and fill in the low spots. But if you do it this way, you've got plenty on there. Just rule it off. Still a little bit wet for doing that, but you can see you just carry on along the wall, and it just makes it a lot easier. Okay, so it's Friday afternoon now, and I've got a 100-mile drive ahead of me before I get home. So I'm not going to wait for this to go off. It really needs to pick up a little bit more before I can close it in with the steel trowel. And what's happening at the moment is I'm trying to close it in just to get rid of this grittiness, and it's kind of bubbling. And that's because it's more like render. And if you go on it too soon, you will get those bubbles, but it will pull back on its own, and probably in about 3 hours time, it will be ready just to close in with a steel trowel, just to get rid of this grittiness. Because what I did is I sponged it all up just to close the holes up, and it's made a reasonable finish on it, but that wouldn't be what you would call a plaster finish. It's not as smooth as that. But, there's always a but. 3 coats of paint, non-vinyl paint, and it will close up beautifully. And the great thing about it is that the paint will hang on here. Sometimes when you get over-polished plaster, the paint peels off. We've got cases of it in this room anyway, so I'm confident that once this is dried out, a few coats of paint will close it in. Back in the day, they would have used lime wash on a lime render, and you can understand what that would have done. So the whole mission here was to get rid of the damp, and I think we've done that, and considering it's a cellar, it's pretty good, and I'm happy and the customer's happy.